Welcome to tonight's New Hampshire House Progressive Caucus Democratic Gubernatorial Forum. I'm State Representative Chris Schultz, the House Progressive Caucus Chair, and tonight's introducer. Our timekeeper is Representative Sally Fellows, and our moderator is Representative Katherine Rogers. The New Hampshire House Progressive Caucus is founded by State Representative Ellen Reed and other Bernie Sanders supporters almost 4 years ago in the aftermath of the 2016 elections. We want New Hampshire state government to work for all granted staters, not the privileged few. Real change cannot just happen in the House chamber, though. To achieve real change, we need more progressives in the state Senate and the Executive Council. We need more progressive House members, and we need a governor who is a progressive leader in the corner office, too. This is our first of 7 primary forums. As this is our first, we may have to work a few kinks out as we go, so we appreciate your patience. And like pretty much everything for state reps, we are volunteers and we put things together with duct tape and twine. So we appreciate your patience on that too. I want to extend a particular thank you to Representative Sophia Wazir for her logistical assistance in coordinating all of our forums. 7 forums is very ambitious, and she has done that very well with the great help of Representative Sue Vail and Representative Nicole Klein-Knight. Those are the committee of folks who have put these forums together, along with our forum hosts. Now for the rules of the forum. Each candidate has 3 minutes for their opening statements, and with a winning coin flip, Councilor Volinsky chose to go second in the opening and closing. We will rotate who answers each question first, and candidates will have 2 minutes to answer questions and 1 minute to respond if their name is evoked. Our moderator for tonight's forum is my state representative, Katherine Rogers of Concord. She's a former prosecutor and long-term state representative who served in many capacities at county and local government as well. And I know she is a very undecided voter in this race and a member of our caucus. So without further ado, I introduce now our host, Representative Katherine Rogers.
Thank you, Representative Schultz. I just want to start out by saying on the questions that I've got, I've tried to cover kind of a broad range of things and solicited information and suggestions from a number of people, not only within this caucus, but throughout the state. So I'm hoping that we kind of go across the board to get both of these gentlemen who are very wise and very good at covering a number of topics, the chance to kind of run the circuit, as we say. So we're starting out through coin toss this morning with Senator Feltus with opening statements. And Dan, I'm going to let you start out.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy and Chris and everybody on the Zoom, and Andrew. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you tonight. As Majority Leader of the State Senate, I can tell you without any hesitation or equivocation that the singular obstacle to meaningful and inclusive progress for all our families, all our communities, and the state of New Hampshire is Chris Sununu. And with your help, we're going to beat Chris Sununu this fall. We have got to. There is so much at stake. I live in the south end of Concord on Hope Avenue with my wonderful wife, Erin, our 2 amazing daughters, Iris and Josie, our 2 dogs, Franklin and Roosevelt. And I have a distinctly different perspective and background than the current governor, who's seeking a rare 3rd term in office. You see, my dad wasn't governor. My brother wasn't a U.S. senator, and I was never gifted a ski resort. My dad worked in a furniture factory for 45 years, the same air-conditioned furniture factory, doing the same job, day in and day out. Fortunately, steelworker organized for decent pay and benefits. My mom, she did part-time work, including the night shift, while raising 4 kids. The gifts they gave to me were the values of hard work, honesty and integrity, and looking out for everybody, especially people left out and left behind. Those are the values I've tried to live my entire life. Right out of law school, serving as a legal aid attorney with New Hampshire Legal Assistance for about a decade, helping low to middle income families, senior citizens, fighting for veterans who have fought for us, for the VA benefits they earned, they're entitled to, helping people during the last Recession, betting Wall Street banks who were foreclosing on folks all across New Hampshire, and seeing so many of the people that fell through the cracks then fall through the cracks now. In the state Senate, doing the same for 3 terms and as majority leader. And if I have the honor and privilege of serving as your next governor of the state of New Hampshire, each and every day I walk into that corner office, middle-income granite staters will have someone in their corner, in the corner office. When we leave Chris Sununu, replace them with some legal aid lawyer from the south end of Concord. We got to do it. You've seen it. He's anti-choice. He's anti-worker. He's pro-Trump. He even calls himself, in his words, a Trump guy through and through, unquote. We have got to win this race. There's so much at stake. We've made so much progress working together. We've gotten real results for ordinary folks. But 80 vetoes later, we know the pathway to making progress for the people of the state of New Hampshire, and it's working together to move New Hampshire forward.
Great. Okay, thanks. Good time too. With that, Councilor Volinsky, would you give us your opening statement?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kathy. Hi, Dan. Look, tonight, I hope we talk about reducing property taxes, improving schools, and no pipelines. We're in the midst of a multi-headed crisis. It's COVID, it's economics, it's healthcare, it's climate change, it's racial injustice. Now is the time for bold ideas and courageous leadership. Now is also the time to cast off the Republican rhetoric of the 1970s that's held our state back for so long. Look, many of you know I was the Claremont school funding lawyer. I've shown that I'm capable of challenging the status quo, particularly when it comes to property taxes and improving schools. When I first went to Claremont, it was a lot like going home for me. I grew up in a mill town where the mill failed. My dad was a mechanic and a maintenance man and a union shop steward. My mother was a homemaker. I'm the only one in my family to go to college. I paid for law school by working as a carpenter. I understand the importance of educational opportunity. It's a question of economic justice, and that is why I'm the only candidate in this race who will not take the pledge. It's a promise to fail. It holds us back. The other thing that's really important to me in this race is climate change. I happen to be a grandfather. I have 2 grandsons, the younger of which is 12 weeks old, and I have never held him. When I think of the climate, I recognize that our time is short, that our future, our children's future, our children's future depends on us taking effective action. The time for half measures is gone. There's no excuse for one more fracked gas pipeline. There's no excuse for committing us for 20 years to a fracked gas contract. That's why I was so opposed to the Granite Bridge pipeline. That's why I opposed Liberty Utilities Granite Bridge 2.0. Look, we need to beat Chris Sununu. I've shown myself capable of leading the executive council on Gordon McDonald, on denying 3 different climate change appointees, on stopping the governor from taking money out of the Treasury until he revealed where the money was going. We'll talk about these topics more. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Councilor. Okay, so now we're going to start with our questions, and I'm going to start out by asking Councilor Volinsky to answer the first question first. As a reflection of the challenging COVID times that we're in, the next state budget is going to be very difficult, incredibly so. One reason and one aspect of that is the issue of the existing revenues coming in right now that are falling far below what was planned for our existing budget. How do you plan on addressing those reduced revenues and what effect it's going to have on the budget that you'll be asked to build if you're elected governor?
Well, I will say there are some people on this call who know a lot about developing budgets, and I'm going to call on them to help with this process. So there are a couple of things that will have to happen. We will need another COVID Financial Relief Act from the federal government. That's just straightforward, going to be necessary. We'll need more federal money. Not all of the COVID relief money has been deployed, and some of that needs to go to fill gaps that already exist. The one thing that cannot happen is we cannot do what Bill O'Brien did coming out of the 2008 recession. O'Brien made a number of moves that downshifted state responsibilities to local communities, grabbed up local monies. Property taxes went up $294 million in the 3 years following the '08 recession. The only person who's done worse than that is Chris Sununu. During his term, property taxes have gone up $320 million, more than under any other governor in New Hampshire state history. So we need to start by setting the rule that we're not going to downshift this to the local property tax. The state's going to meet its responsibilities on its own. We're going to need federal money. We're going to have to be careful how we spend money. But by cutting spending, we have to recognize that some of our expenditures are investments, and you nurture your investments.
Thank you. Senator
Sorry,
Feltus.
Sally, I lost track of you.
Senator Feltus, you helped build this last budget and you see where the revenues are coming in short. How are you going to make up for those effects in the budget you'll build? I think he's muted, Chris.
I had nothing to do with that. Let me just say.
Chris, we can't hear Senator Feltus.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first and foremost, we built the most progressive budget in state history. We need to protect it and build off of it. We did that in part by closing loopholes for big multi-state, multinational corporations. Loopholes that exist in our existing tax code, including loopholes that Netflix and Amazon use to pay nothing in our corporate tax code. And now with this budget that we crafted working together, a lot of people on this Zoom call working together, we secured $140 million in new education spending for our local schools, helping to relieve some of the property tax burden right now. That's the biggest ed funding in state history, the biggest increase in 20 years, and finally doing full day kindergarten the way we should have done it a long time ago. And on top of that, there's plenty more loopholes in the system for those at the top and big corporations. I happen to believe it's a rigged system. For example, I was the only Senate co-sponsor of closing the individual capital gains loophole. In fact, I worked on drafting that language several years ago. We need to close the loopholes that benefit those at the top at the expense of middle-income granted staters, working people and working families who are taking it on the chin right now. We know in this fiscal year, Kathy and Chris, that we got about $143 million in a gap. That can be filled with the existing CARES Act money that's right there that Chris Sununu has. But he has not told anybody he's going to do that. He has the flexibility to do it. He can tell school districts their budgets won't get cut, and instead he chose not to. So there's complete uncertainty. Couple that with the lack of a reopening plan with public health standards and real financial support for our schools, and teachers and working families are anxious because they don't have the support they need. That's an absence of leadership by Chris Sununu. It's just like Trump punting it all down to the local level. In future budgets, we got to close those loopholes. We got to leverage the federal financial resources, and we have got to work together. I happen to believe it's going to be Democrats across the board, and we've got
Sally,
to work
we're up
together
on
to
time.
support consensus.
Sorry, but Sally says we're up on time. Sally, you can scream out if you need to. I want to follow up a little bit more on the budget question and ask you, Dan, we're going to start with you this time, a little bit more depth on the budget in that, as you said in the last budget, the Democrats were able to increase aid to education, $138 million, $40 million to municipalities, more than we've done in 20 years. 3 parts on this. Would you continue in that trend of funding? And would you, how would you fund that? Are you taking the pledge to veto a sales and income tax? And is the pledge even relevant anymore? So 3 parts. How do you want to fund it? You continuing the trend that we've set the last time? And is the pledge relevant?
Thank you very much, Kathy. I don't think the pledge, to be honest with you, it's about what we're going to do in the budget. So I don't support a broad-based income or sales tax. I support closing loopholes that benefit those at the top and big corporations. The pledge is a talking point. It's not a plan. We constructed the most progressive budget in state history. We can protect that and build off of it. And after Chris Sununu, by the way, vetoed that budget that we all worked on, he not only vetoed it, there was a bunch of hot air throughout the summer, blaming Democrats and all kinds of stuff. He wanted the education funding out. I was part of the negotiation team. Trust me, he wanted it out. And each and every time he came to the table, we said no, no, no. And we protected that education funding in that budget. And then afterwards, he went around with these large oversized checks, tried to take credit for it. And on top of that, he wrote a letter to superintendents of schools saying, consider it one time. Don't make any planning moving forward. Consider it one-time funding. That's not right. We got to win this race to protect that budget and build off of it. Look at what the School Funding Commission does and recommends. I'm honored to have the support of the chair of the School Funding Commission, the chair of the Senate Education Committee, the chair of the House Education Committee, over 100 state reps, 10 state senators, 14 labor unions, and Citizens United, and Steve Marchand, Molly Kelly, Colin Van Osteren. And we're working really hard to build the broad coalition to win this race. And that's what this is about. Every election, everybody said, well, this is the most important election of a lifetime. 2020, it's true. We've got to win up and down the ballot here in 2020. And we're building that broad coalition of progressives, moderate Democrats, like-minded independents and Republicans to do just that. If we're going to build off this budget, Kathy, and continue down this route by, again, closing loopholes, plenty of which still in the system, we got to win first. And that's what this is about, unifying together to win.
Okay. Sally says that we've timed. Okay. Councilor Volinsky, again, three-part question. Do you plan to follow the trend that was set in the last budget with increased funding to education, municipal aid? How would you fund it? And where are you taking the pledge? And do you think the pledge is still relevant?
Thank you. So, Kathy, I'll answer your question directly, but let me first put us in context. That largest education increase in history moved us from worst in the nation in state support for public education to worst in the nation for public support of education. So let's be clear. We improved some, but not enough. We have structural problems in the existing revenue system that prevent us from getting to where we need to be. And let's give the House credit. The House put together an education budget that was $70 million more than the Senate did. And then the Senate forced the House to give away $25 million of that difference in a compromise. So the House was way ahead on school funding. I would say that all options need to be on the table. I'd set some parameters. The first parameter is we have to lower property taxes for the majority of New Hampshire citizens. The second is everyone needs to pay their fair share going forward. So I would continue the budget trend, but it's not enough. And you can't do enough with the current revenue structure. Look, Jeanne Shaheen, John Lynch, Maggie Hassan, all really good governors. They couldn't find enough loopholes to close to fix school funding in our state. If that's your approach, it's not going to work. And whether you say the words, the pledge is relevant or not relevant, if you say you'll take things off the table before the mature adult discussion even happens, then you might as well say, I take the pledge, which is what is happening at the time. I won't take the pledge because all options need to be on the table. We need to finally fix the school funding problem because it's gotten so much worse since the time of Claremont. What we're doing is not sustainable. And if we want to move New Hampshire forward for its children and its taxpayers and its seniors and its working people, you know, businesses pay twice as much in property taxes as in business taxes. We need to deal with that.
Sally says we're at the time. Sorry. I have to go by Sally's time.
Yeah, you know what? It would help. Sally, could you just say time? Because it's hard
She's
to.
muted, so it's hard for her. I'm trying to get the. I've got a little timer going too, so we'll try to get close. Let's move on to another question. So I could talk budget all day, but I'm sure many other people are bored by it. So, one of Governor Sununu's first actions as governor was to give himself a $30,000 a year raise. And since then, he's continually vetoed an increase in the minimum wage for everybody else in the state. If you're elected governor, do you pledge to bring the governor's salary back to the level it was when Maggie Hassan was governor, and keep it there until the legislature presents to you a bill that sets New Hampshire's minimum wage to a true living wage for our working men and women? And this question goes first to Councilor Volinsky as we're trading back and forth.
I have no problems with that pledge. I would voluntarily forego part of the salary if I'm elected governor. But let's talk about what a living wage is. I want a $15 minimum wage on my desk. You don't get to 15 by fighting for 12. That's what the last two bills were that were sent to Sununu. We all knew he was going to veto whatever was sent. And so I don't understand why compromising ourselves made sense by going at $12. We should have been at 15. At the same time, we need to lift the cap on unemployment benefits. Right now, New Hampshire is lowest in New England at $427 a week. We need to move that to $15 an hour or $600 a week, and then make provision for families that have a number of dependents. Right now, it's $427 fits all. Not only would I agree to the reduced wages, I led the effort to deny Frank Edelblue a raise. And my colleagues on the council this term went with me, and we denied Edelblue his $8,000 raise. He should not be rewarded for working to take apart public education in New Hampshire. I also worked to deny a raise to the Liquor Commission because their work has been so abysmally
30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Has been so abysmally poor in looking out for state workers' safety with respect to money and with now respect to COVID. They're not doing a good job at raising funds for the state, and I think that their pay should reflect that. So I was able to arrange a brief respite from a raise for them, and then I was eventually outvoted on that.
Time.
Okay, so we have multiple timers now, and
Right.
okay, we'll get it. Thank you.
The problem is I keep getting cut off. I keep ending up back in mute, so you can't.
Okay. Okay, hopefully everybody's cool with this, and if it becomes an issue, I'm going to change it. But just know that now everyone has the ability to mute and unmute themselves, and I know this is a fantastic group of human beings who will know when to keep themselves muted.
All right, back to the debate. Senator Feltus, do you need me to repeat the question, or are you all set?
I'm all set. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate it. It's an interesting idea, and yes, I agree to it. We need to get to a $15 minimum wage. We need to get that done. We're going to get it done when we win this race. And beyond that, I led the charge in the legislature to approve the fact finder reports for the state employee pay raise. They're doing the work in this pandemic right now. And they're being disrespected by Chris Sununu for not even giving them a contract. For crying out loud, I went to the fact finder and they won't even agree to the fact finder. I was like, this is pretty basic stuff. And it's basic indictment of his management and inability to lead. He can't get a state employee contract? Come on. So this is about standing up for working people and working families. That's what this election's all about. Whose side are you on? That's why we laid out a workers' COVID-19 Bill of Rights earlier this spring, some of which we put forward in legislation, all of which been vetoed. That's what's at stake in this race. You got Chris Sununu arguing for corporate immunity on workers get harmed on the job. He literally did that. Governor Charlie Baker and Phil Scott refused to sign on to that letter, but Chris Sununu certainly sent that letter. And look, and when we talk about this, it does go back to the budget. It does go back to funding our communities in middle-class property taxpayer relief. And I will note, since we've talked about it, and Councilor Volinsky mentioned it in the answer to a prior question, just a couple of days ago on WMUR, Councilor Volinsky said, I think, this is not my words, I think overall we spend the right amount on schools.
30 seconds.
I fundamentally disagree. I don't think we spend enough on schools, especially not now. Especially not now. We need to invest in our schools, invest in our communities. And you know what? The state Senate did a little bit more to mental health than the House did. We reached consensus. And you know what? I happen to believe we're going to win up and down the ballot. And consensus is going to get things done. That's what we did in that budget. And that's how we move forward.
Okay.
So since my name was invoked,
Yes, I was going to say, since your name was invoked, you get a minute to respond, Counselor.
I think it's fair to say that there's never been a gubernatorial candidate in our state's history who knows more about school funding than I do. We spend about $3.3 billion on K-12 public education in New Hampshire. That is about the right amount if we even out that expenditure. And I think tomorrow you'll hear from the Education Commission that that's how they come out. That if we even out the expenditures, 3.2 billion is about right. If we don't even them out, then of course we need to invest more in the poorer communities. But overall, it's about the right number.
Okay. All right, speaking of education, and this, we start out with Senator Feltes. Commissioner of Education, Mr. Edelblut, we've now talked about, began his term in February of 2017 and will be up in February of 2021. Would you reappoint him as your governor? And if not, how will you go about vetting his replacement? And what will you look for in his replacement? If you will reappoint him, why?
No way. I mean, I think we can all agree on that.
I had to ask.
It's fair.
And, you know, look, Chris Sununu is the real problem here. Chris Sununu, Edelblut. Chris Sununu wrote a letter of recommendation for Betsy DeVos, for crying out loud, for Betsy DeVos's confirmation in the U.S. Senate. This is a right-wing ideological approach to public school education, functioning to siphon off public taxpayer money, the private prep schools and religious schools. We've seen it even recently, Kathy, with Sununu diverting 1.5 million to school vouchers when he sent an additional $0 to our public schools to help with reopening. We put forward a plan on reopening with public health standards and real financial support. We call it Live Free and Learn Safe. You can take a look at it on our website, but we got to support our schools, our families, and our communities. So that is going to be preeminent in my mind. Whoever we appoint needs to believe in public schools and public education. Career needs to believe that that's how we build a bigger and better and brighter future for Iris and Josie and all of our kids. That's it right there. The best investments we can make as a society and the investments we make in our kids. That's part of the reason I ran for public office to begin with in 2014 on full day kindergarten. We finally treat kindergarten the same as any other grade school. And now we got to do pre-K.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Sally. We're one of only 6 states that doesn't do anything for pre-K. We got to end that. We got to invest in early childhood education. We got to invest in quality, affordable childcare. All of these things have a disproportionate impact on low to middle income families, and particularly women, and especially right now in COVID-19. So there's so much at stake in this race. And education and public education is a huge component about how we get out of this mess in a way that works for everybody.
Thank you. Councilor Volinsky, the same question. Would you reappoint Mr. Edelblut? If so, why? And if not, how would you go about vetting for a new commissioner, and what would you look at choosing?
I think it's fair to say that Frank Edelblut and I are not close. I would not reappoint Edelblut. I did everything I could to stop his appointment in the first place. And I'm the one on the council who most often holds him to account on things, as Dan mentioned, his transfer of public money to private schools, his efforts to undermine schools with vouchers and things of that nature, his effort to support Learn Everywhere and remove local control. All of that, I'm in his face, challenging him. Going forward, I have a couple of things in mind that apply more broadly than just the Department of Education and its commissioner, but you start with people who have shown a commitment to the mission of the agency that they're being appointed to lead. In this case, it's education. You then look for documented experience, academic and practical experience at multiple levels. You then look to see that they can manage people, because all of our agencies, even the smallest, have a number of state employees. There are complex work environments. We need to have people leading the agencies who are fair to workers, who support workers, and who are willing to advance the mission of the agency with workers in mind. Frank Adelblue doesn't meet any of those requirements. It's an easy decision not to reappoint him.
30 seconds.
The other thing is we don't have enough diversity in state leadership. I would look for candidates not only for this job, but broadly to lead state agencies and to take the number 2 and number 3 spots in state agencies who are Black and brown people who've been excluded from leadership positions, but who've shown the talent and the preparation to do those.
Fine.
Thank you. Speaking of diversity, New Hampshire is demographically one of the whitest states in the Union, second only to Maine. What do you believe discourages people of color from choosing New Hampshire as a home, and what would you do to address it as governor? And we'll start with you, Councilor Volinsky.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that that exist in our state that make it harder for Black and brown people to live here, to build a nucleus, a sizable mass of Black and brown people so that there's comfort in numbers. I've seen it in my own employment hiring. It's difficult to be the only Black face or the only brown face in an employment situation. We have systemic racism. Let's be clear about that. Chris Sununu is just dead wrong on that. We have overt racism. The KKK met in Rochester in '91. A young boy almost was lynched in Claremont in '17. Over Memorial Day, a Black man with driving a car without an inspection sticker got tased and yanked out of his car by state troopers by his hair. All of those contribute to the difficulty of encouraging Black and brown people to live in our state. So first, I'd start with law enforcement. We need to demilitarize law enforcement. We need to diversify the officers who work in law enforcement. We need to do implicit bias training for law enforcement. I underwent it in 2017. It makes a big difference. Healthcare. We should not have disproportionately bad healthcare outcomes for Black and brown people. I would build on the health center backbone. I was on the board for
30
Manchester
seconds.
Community Health Center for 6 years, and it made a difference. I served with a number of new Americans in that post. Education, I keep coming back to education. Manchester's the most diverse community in our state. Nashua is second. Manchester spends the least per child on public education of any community in our state. We need to fund it better, but we need to also work on ethnically, culturally, racially diverse curricula, and we need to diversify the teaching force.
Thank you. Senator Feltes, same question. Do you need me to repeat it?
Sure, if you could, that'd be great.
Okay, yeah. New Hampshire is demographically one of the whitest states in the Union, second only to Maine. What do you believe discourages people of color from choosing New Hampshire as a home, and what would you do as governor to address that?
Well, thank you, Kathy. You know, our daughters, Iris and Josie, have skin that's darker in color than Aaron or I. And we've faced comments. And each and every day across America and in New Hampshire, Black and brown people face words, actions, and policies that rob them even of the American dream. And Chris Sununu saying systemic racism doesn't exist. The first step in combating systemic racism is acknowledging it exists, and then moving from there to dismantle it and eradicate systemic practices that have a disparate negative impact on communities of color. That's what I've tried to do my entire career at Legal Aid for 10 years, 4 years of which led the Housing Justice Project, led the effort to combat housing discrimination all around New Hampshire, including working with groups on the ground, Manchester NAACP, to root it out, to do cases to combat it. And that's what I've done in the state Senate. I've tried my best, and with working with many of you, everything from criminal justice reform and bail reform to some of the police reforms we just did. But we got to go way beyond that, and we got to listen to those marching for change. This isn't just a moment, it should be a movement. And the best ideas come from the ground up, not the top down. But here's just a couple ideas. Number one, create the Office of Racial Equity within the governor's office. Vermont does this, we should do it. Staff it by a person of color, lead it, identify and eradicate systemic practices within state government and state policies that have a disparate impact on Black and brown communities. Number two, there is a Supreme Court justice up for nomination. Thank you, Sally. There's a Supreme Court justice up for nomination because Kristen Sununu refuses to nominate. There has never been a person of color on the New Hampshire Supreme Court. I will put a person of color on the New Hampshire Supreme Court when we win this race.
Okay, thank you. Furthermore, going a little bit deeper into this question, many have pointed to the criminal justice system as a major source of racism in New Hampshire and an area that reform needs to take place. Governor Sununu set up a commission to look at police accountability, all the while denying that there's any systematic racism. At the same time, our zoning and a lot of our municipal statutes and municipal ordinances often serve as the first step in keeping people of color out of communities. As governor, would you work with putting together a commission or some kind of review that would look at those possibilities, those zoning and those municipal ordinances that works to keep housing unavailable to not only people of color, but people of less economic means? So it's not only racism, but classism that we talk at. Is that something that you would, as governor, look at, and do you agree that it exists? And Councilor, or Senator Feltes, to start with you on this.
Well, thank you very much for asking that, Kathy. Absolutely. Look, nationwide, the vacancy rate in rental housing is about 5%. In New Hampshire, it's about 1%. That means that people can't find a place to live, and if they do, the prices, no pun intended, are through the roof. And in Manchester and Nashua, it's 0%, literally. It's a landlord market. And those communities disproportionately have New Hampshire's communities of color. Access to housing is critical, absolutely critical. It's something I've worked on as a legal aid lawyer for years. It's something I've led on in the state Senate. We need to deal with some of these local ordinances, including with respect to density. Precluding multifamily units based on density ordinances is something we need to look at and deal with. In fact, if you talk with people on the ground, Housing Action New Hampshire, all the advocates, that seems to be the biggest impediment to the development of multifamily units, which affects low to middle income people and disproportionately affects access to housing for communities of color. In addition to that, Kathy, we need to further ramp up our workforce affordable housing fund at the statewide level. In this last budget, you may recall that we stabilized that funds and did it on a consistent annual basis. The first $5 million of the real estate transfer tax revenue going to stabilize that and send an ongoing statement that New Hampshire is open for business when it comes to refabbing mill buildings and other projects that can really serve as a basis for workforce affordable housing. So we need to do those things. We absolutely, and this goes to the bigger,
30 seconds.
The bigger overarching issue. What's at stake in this election? This election is going to be, whose side are you on? How do we get out of this mess called COVID in a way that actually works for working people and working families? Or is it just going to be the same old from Sununu for corporate special interests? Housing is a key component. It's a key component to healthcare outcomes too. And if we're going to deal with the systemic issues in this state, we got to move forward with workforce housing.
Thank you. Councilor Volinsky, do you need me to repeat the question, or are you all set with it?
No, I think I have it. Thanks, Kathy.
Okay.
So your question started out with criminal justice. And just so it's clear, my first 5 years of law practice was as a public defender. I understand how criminal justice works and how in many instances it's broken in our state and elsewhere. After 5 years as a public defender, I spent the rest of my career through this past January being a volunteer lawyer on death penalty cases. So I understand the problems with the criminal justice system. Just this last council meeting, we had a contract for simulation software at the Police Standards and Training Council, and I asked about, could we incorporate implicit bias training in that software? No one else was talking about that. And the answer was, yeah, we could do that. We didn't think about it. So there's a lot we can do on the criminal justice side. On affordable housing, you have to look at the property tax. There are some communities that make it harder for affordable housing development because affordable housing brings younger families. Younger families have children that go to school, and the communities can't afford more young children. That is not the way to build a thriving New Hampshire. So we need to stop our over-reliance on the property tax so that we can build affordable housing. The other thing is we're a small state. When I think about affordable housing, I think of capital available. How do we best access the capital markets? And I think we do that by building coalitions with our neighbors. So on the eastern part of the state, we need to be working with Maine to access capital markets. On the western part of the state, we need to be working with Vermont. All three states have really good affordable housing advocates. I think if we team up, we can do a lot more for the state.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to move a little bit into somewhat of an environmental situation. New Hampshire has some major environmental issues with water. We have all heard of the PFAS problems and the problems of our water contaminants. And much of that we can pay for with some of the federal funds that's coming in. However, we have a crisis looming with our aging wastewater systems that the commissioners have talked about that could be billions of dollars. How would you pay for this billion-dollar crisis of municipal wastewater that's coming over the next decade? And it's been addressed at a very slow pace at this point, but every day we have more and more systems that are failing in the municipal level and are having to be picked up by our cities and towns if they can pick them up, and quite often they can't. And this we start off with, I believe this is Senator Felton, no, it's Councilor Volinsky, I'm sorry.
I think it's my turn.
Yep.
So I think the problem with wastewater treatment plants are both a matter of aging and limited capacity and the extra cost that's involved in meeting more strict PFAS and PFOA standards. So you have both kind of happening at the same time. Some of this, we'd look for federal help. Some of this, particularly the PFAS and PFOA type pollution, we should be looking to the polluters. We need to be putting them more, we need to be enhancing their responsibility for the costs that the communities bear in order to deal with the messes that they've created. And so I would have my Attorney General being far more aggressive against Saint-Gobain and a number of others about this. There are some national level law firms that have organized lawsuits against this type of polluter. We should be in those cases. We should be pursuing those polluters, even if they're out of state and we are downstream on their pollution. So I would start in those two places. I think wastewater infrastructure, it's not sexy, but when you invest in infrastructure, you put money into the local economy.
30 seconds.
I got it from both of you. The local economy, and you create local jobs. That's the benefit of infrastructure investment. So going forward, even though we're looking at tighter budgets, we're going to have to sustain local economies. And in part, I would do that by making infrastructure investments. They return 3 or 4 times your invested money.
Thank you. Senator Feltis, can you repeat the question, or are you?
No, I'm good to
Okay,
go.
great.
Thank you very much. Well, New Hampshire's already in one of those lawsuits against major polluters with respect to our water. And I'm hopeful that with the funding the legislature put into the budget to fund that lawsuit, that in fact we'll get a good settlement. Minnesota did. Minnesota on an order of a few $100 million. And so I'm hopeful that that will happen. Beyond that, we do need to get involved in suing fossil fuel industry, including Exxon Mobil and others like Rhode Island and Massachusetts did, because we know it has a direct impact on New Hampshire, our citizens, our businesses, and the Seacoast in particular. The fact that, and I wrote with Mindy Mesmer to Governor Sununu and Attorney General McDonald to encourage them to get into that, file that suit. They said no. As governor, I will direct the Attorney General to file suit against the fossil fuel industry to look out for New Hampshire. Beyond that, we worked, myself, Rennie Cushing, Minnie Mesmer, a lot of people on this Zoom call together to set the most stringent standards in state history for PFAS and PFCs and PFOA. And then 3M took us to court, and then we didn't stop there. We all worked together and we put them in statute. Not only that, we funded $50 million in Treasury-backed bonds to help our municipalities deal with this. That's the kind of model moving forward. And I've been working on these water issues for a while with a lot of you. I actually served as vice chair of the Water Commission with Chuck Morse. Worked together with Chuck Morse on water to help our communities. And this is something that we need to keep our eye on the ball on. And work together. And on top of that, let's be clear. Chris Sununu just vetoed medical monitoring. He just vetoed a bill we worked on to hold polluters accountable with medical monitoring, disproportionately impacting families and siding with big corporations and big polluters. So again, this race is about whose side are you on?
All right, thank you. The next question I'm going to ask you is about gun violence protection. I know you all know it was coming. In three-part. And this starts out with Senator Feltes. Do you support or would you sign into law a background check for gun purchases, a wait period bill and an ERPO bill? And what other gun violence protection measures would you want to see the state move into if you were elected governor?
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. I appreciate that. You know, obviously working with you and Moms Demand Action, getting the Moms Demand Common Sense Gun Violence Prevention candidate distinction, along with Andrew has been recognized for that too. We have worked together. We passed 4 common sense pieces of legislation for the first time in New Hampshire history. And a lot of times people say, hey, you know what would it look like with you as governor? And now I just say, take the 80 vetoes and flip them around. We'll sign them. Everything that I've worked on with all of you, universal background checks, gun-free school zones, a common sense waiting period, and extreme risk protection orders. All of them are critical for the safety of our kids, our communities, and our state. And all of them, by the way, have overwhelming bipartisan support across the political spectrum, Democrats, independents, and Republicans. Chris Sununu put him on the wrong side of the New Hampshire people by vetoing these pieces of legislation. And he put him on the wrong side of working together by trying to partisanize it. And look, the reality is that if you want to get your handle on the mental health crisis in the state, you can't be serious about it unless you sign those pieces of legislation. I mean, we have one of the highest growing rates of suicide, unfortunately, in the country, right here in New Hampshire, and the highest growing rate of teen suicide. And 90% of suicides in New Hampshire are firearms related. And states that did a waiting period
3 seconds.
saw a reduction in suicides. And so let's be clear. This is about safety in schools. It's about safety of our communities, and it's about our behavioral health crisis. That's what this is about. Thank you for everybody who's worked on these pieces of legislation. We're going to sign them. We're going to get them done right away.
Thank you. Councilor Volinsky, do you need me to repeat it or are you all set?
I think I'm all set. Thank you. I have received the Moms Demand Action Candidate of Distinction recognition. I would quickly sign the kinds of legislation that you've outlined, the waiting period, the ERPOs. I would make it clear that we need state regulated gun-free school zones, not local decision. state decision. My son Josh happens to be a 7th grade science teacher in Denver. Schools were closed there on the anniversary of Columbine. This is pretty important to me. My daughter Molly, for 5 years, was a social worker at a high school in Harlem. She dealt with kids who had mental health problems, kids who were suffering from a great deal of stress at home. The idea that we wouldn't do a waiting period to help us deal with the suicide problem is unacceptable to me. The idea that we would allow guns on school property, also unacceptable to me. We kick around this term, defund the police. We need to use police for the purposes that they are best at. We need to use social workers for the purposes that they are best at. And we need to hire more social workers. I'm not saying this for my daughter's benefit because she doesn't live here, but we need to incorporate social workers into what other people have commonly thought to be law enforcement realms. We need to train up the officers, but we also need to have trained professionals. The same is true at schools. We need more social workers in our schools. Would I trade SROs for social workers? I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask one last question before we do our closing. And this is going to be kind of the fun question. Lisa, I hope it's fun for you all. I want to ask you each so that we can know a little bit more about you personally to share with us. Tell us who do you look up to as a personal hero, not a family member, but a political leader, somebody either living or dead, who's inspired you in your public life, that you look up to, that you'd like to be more like, that is kind of enticed you to be what you are today. And I believe we start with Councilor Volinsky on this one.
So that social worker daughter, Molly.
I said not a family member, remember?
No.
Okay.
Let me finish. That social worker daughter, Molly, also has done stand-up. And she does a whole riff on how to upset pops. And it's by making fun of John Adams. John Adams is one of my heroes, as geeky as that sounds. He wrote the Education Clause. He stood up for the soldiers that needed to be stood up for in Boston, even though they were British. That is the epitome of doing the right thing for the right reasons. So John Adams is really high on my list. The second person I would mention is Steve Bright. Steve Bright was my clinical instructor in law school. He went on to found the Southern Center for Human Rights. That is the organization through which I volunteered for almost 40 years to do death penalty defense work throughout the South. It's where I met Brian Stevenson, the author of Just Mercy. He's committed his entire life selflessly to training young lawyers on how to do battle on racial equity grounds in the criminal justice system. He is one of my heroes.
Great. Senator Feltes?
Thank you, Kathy. I think about those folks who were real leaders in the civil rights era that were marching for change then and leading the charge for change. John Lewis, Dr. King, Bobby Kennedy, leaders that have stood up in the face of unimaginable obstacles, dreaming the possible from the impossible. Bobby Kennedy talking about activism, and then apartheid South Africa, when he said, each time someone stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And through many acts of kindness and activism, those ripples, they turn into waves, and those waves can shake down the greatest walls of intolerance and injustice that still exist. Kathy, that quote then, it was true then, it's true now. Everything we do and say counts. Everything we work on, everybody on this progressive Zoom call, all your work matters. Every call we make, every conversation we have, every march we do with our friends, with our brothers and sisters, It's part of that movement for change. And I'm reminded by Dr. King's quote too, that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It's on all of us to bend that arc and bend it as fast as we can right now. In this election, I think we can take heart in those comments that activism matters, that we can collectively change. We can collectively change this state for the better, for our collective futures, for Iris and Josie's future, for all of our kids' future. We can build a foundation for success that's as strong as the granite under our soil, and we can look out for one another and not just win up and down the ticket, but finally move New Hampshire forward for everybody.
Thank you. Well, now we've come to the closing statements. And Chris, who did we start with the closing statements?
Dan.
Dan, okay. I'm
The
sorry.
same order as the beginning. Yep.
Okay, so Dan, you get our first start off with our closing statements.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy and Chris and Andrew and everybody on this Zoom call. It's an honor to be here with you tonight. I'm grateful for everything you've all done and all that we're going to do together. And this uncertain time of COVID, where kids are going back to school, everybody's anxious, where there's uncertainty at work, including a governor who wants corporate immunity for big corporations who put their workers at risk. So much is uncertain right now. We gotta look out for those families. Families like my family I grew up in. My dad worked in a furniture factory for 45 years. My mom, part-time jobs, including night shift, while raising 4 kids. The people I looked out for, did my best to help as a legal aid lawyer, who fell through the cracks during the last economic crisis. I helped my darnest to lift them up. We need to lift those people up again, right now. That's what this is about. Looking out for everybody in this campaign. In order to move New Hampshire forward, we can't afford to leave anyone behind. We got to work hard to lift people up, not tear people down. Fight to include more people in our democracy and economy, not exclude them, and work for a relief and recovery effort that works for everybody, not just those at the top, not just folks with Chris Sununu's cell phone number, getting no bid contracts and special sweetheart deals. We got to look out for everybody. And this governor's not doing it. Just like Trump, he's looking out for corporate special interests, his family and his friends. And he calls himself, in his words, a Trump guy through and through. Believe him. Believe him. We need you. I respectfully ask for your vote in this race. Love to have you on the team. But beyond that, I respectfully ask you for your activism. We need your progressive activism for change. We need it now more than ever. I believe in you. I believe in our collective ability to create change. We can do this. The pundits are saying this isn't possible, but impossible has never been in New Hampshire's vocabulary, and it's not in mine, and I know it's not in yours either. So let's get together. Let's do this. Let's win this race, and let's finally move New Hampshire forward for everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Let's go win this.
Thank you very much, Senator Feltus. Councilor Volinsky?
Thank you. Look, there is more that unites us as Democrats than divides us. But the things that separate us are important, particularly as it relates to how we challenge Chris Sununu. We need to make the hardest, clearest contrasts with Chris Sununu that are at all possible. So I start with the pledge. We need to make Chris Sununu defend the property tax that has gone up more than under any other governor in our state's history. You can't do that if you take the pledge. We need to move away from the rhetoric that the Republicans have stuck us with since the 1970s. Doing that, not taking the pledge, puts me in a position to make the stronger contrast against Chris Sununu. Look, he's beaten 2 pledge candidates in a row. There's no reason to think that a 3rd pledge candidate will do any better. Pipelines. Chris Sununu has not met a pipeline project that he didn't love. The fact that I've opposed the fracked gas pipeline, that I oppose the expansion of fracking, using fracking gas in New Hampshire, makes me a clear contrast to the climate change denying Chris Sununu. That's number 2. Number three, there's the question of how we pay for our campaigns. Chris Sununu is the master of the LLC loophole. I have never used the LLC loophole, but others have. And that makes it harder for them to challenge Chris Sununu on this point. I also have never taken fossil fuel money. That makes me distinctly different than candidates who've taken up to $1,700 from Liberty Utilities and supported their fracked gas pipeline. Again, contrast is important. We have a hard race ahead of us, but we have many who are joining us. We're endorsed by the 17,000 member NEA Teachers Union because of all my hard work on school funding for decades. We're endorsed by the Sierra Club, 350.org, New Hampshire Youth Movement, New Hampshire Youth Climate Strike, the Sunrise Movements, Rights and Democracy. A number of progressive organizations have endorsed us on climate change issues because I am the real candidate pushing hard to combat climate change. When it comes to paying for campaigns, I'm endorsed by Granny D's family and by Ben & Jerry. And they're naming an ice cream after me. It's called Volinsky's Courageous Crunch. I think that's a winning combination. I'm asking you to join me. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder to shoulder as we move forward to September 8th and then beyond and challenge Chris Sununu. I think we can beat him together, leaving no one behind, looking out for working families, making him defend every one of those vetoes, making him defend the property tax. I humbly ask for your vote. Join us. Go to VolinskyNH.com. Thank you so much for having us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you both gentlemen for very informed answers, and thank all of you for watching it. I apologize for my failings of the moderator. I tried to get a number of questions in, and we could probably go on for another 2 hours with all the information that both these gentlemen have and the questions that you all have. I tried to touch the surface, and I'm sure there'll be other instances where we can ask them all questions. But again, I thank you both for giving us very informed answers to a lot of questions. There's a lot of things out there, because as we know, Governor Sununu has done nothing but just veto everything that many of us have spent a lot of time doing. So we hope, I think I can speak for everybody here, we hope that one of you is going to be in that old corner office next year so that we don't just have to sit around waiting for him to veto everything and try to do an override. We'd have much more fun standing next to one of you getting veto pens again. They're much more fun to collect than to look at veto stamps. So thank you both very much. I wish both of you good luck. I am still in the undecided category, and it's very difficult since both of you, one of you is my senator, one of you is my counselor, you're both my friends, and I think highly of both of you. So with that, I will turn it back to Chris, and thank you, Chris, for the opportunity to do this. It was great fun, and again, I apologize for any mistakes I've made.
Oh, you did a great job.
Absolutely. Kathy Rogers did a great job. I'm lucky that she is my favorite state rep. I also want to take a moment to say, don't forget that we're hosting 3 state Senate forums and 3 executive council forums. And I hope that if you didn't have a chance to sign up through our official process, there's a Google form that we have where you can sign up for the remaining 6, including the 2 seats vacated by our candidates featured here tonight. I'd also like to thank Representative Sally Fellows for stepping up quite adeptly, I will say. Maybe you'll help us in the next 6 forums, Sally. You were a great timekeeper. I think you did a much better job than I would have done, to be honest with you. And I'm very thrilled to have had this opportunity to talk about these great important topics to us as progressives with both of you, and appreciate your time and your respect for our organization as we continue to build power. And thanks to everybody who was able to join us. There will be a recording. I'm not sure where it'll be available yet, hopefully on YouTube, that I can post for everywhere. I'll make sure the campaigns have a copy of that link once it's available. And that's it. Everybody have a lovely Sunday evening, and we'll be hearing who our vice president will be tomorrow, I believe. So, bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Good
Take
night.
care.
Everyone be well. Stay safe.
Very nice.
Thank you. You too.